I've recently read that Russia is making some gains, taking over some more land, Ukraine. But the thing I wanted to start with now, I've acknowledged time and time again with you and then in other segments on the program, the fog of war, you have no idea what in the hell's going on the ground in any given conflict. We don't know what the actual casualty number is. But the New York Times just recently reported that the Russians have suffered 600,000 casualties. Now, that's dead and wounded collective. But I did a quick check, and during the entire 9 years that the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, they lost a total of 15,000 men. And they were there 9 years. So, even if the figure is half of what the New York Times says, I mean, that's a significant amount of carnage, and I can only imagine how bad it's been for the Ukrainians.
I don't think that number is anywhere close to being right, just based on how the war is being waged and what the Russians are doing. I think that frankly is part of a disinformation campaign by the West. But I will tell you, and I've talked to some pro-Russian people who say the number isn't minor. They say it's somewhere around 80,000 dead, which is a staggering number when you're talking anything else, because it's like probably double that wounded, seriously wounded we're talking about. So it's massive numbers no matter what. And the reason I say I don't think that the high number is right is because of how Russia conducts itself. It doesn't use these so-called meat wave attacks, which everybody in the West seems to say as a matter of fact that that's what they do. That's not how they operate. They actually lead with firepower, artillery, drone strikes, missile strikes, etc., so that they don't put their troops in as much risk. Now then, they're not going straight bull rushed into cities like they did in Bakhmut. They're doing flanking maneuvers, etc. So I think that they're causing a whole lot more casualties on the Ukraine side, but they are now prioritizing not losing their men and spending more ammunition in response.
Honestly, sir, that's exactly what I expected you to say. Because when I saw that, I'm like, "There's no way 600,000." But we'll take the numbers as we see them, and we'll analyze them accordingly. Which is why I appreciate we have you to talk to
Yeah,
us.
and it doesn't make any sense what they claim, which they claim Russia has more casualties than the Ukraine side does, even though they also claim that Russia has between a 5 and 10 to 1 firepower advantage. And I just don't know how you get the logic that says the guys with 10 times more ammunition and weapons suffer 10 times more casualties. It's just irrational.
All right, moving to what seems to be a certainty. It's widely reported Russia has made some gains in Ukraine, in the territory within Ukraine, and they are advancing rather than, well, being held on a line.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's not a stalemate. It is a methodical grind forward, and in the last about month and a half, Russia's gains have been picking up speed. This incursion into the Kursk, where the Ukraine in August invaded a portion of Russia, is being squeezed out, and it's now at serious risk of being completely cut off at the neck, so that Ukraine will either have to withdraw them all real quick, or they may lose them. But on the eastern front, around the Pokrovsk area, around a city called Torets, they just lost another city called around Vuhledar. They're moving forward, etc. All the places that they're fighting, there's three main ones in the east, and they're just making methodical progress in each of them.
And they're holding the line there too. This isn't like they, capture a city and then the Ukrainians come in around side or flank them and push them back out. They're holding the territory as they advance forward.
That is correct. There haven't been any meaningful counterattacks, even tactical counterattacks by the Ukraine side, maybe since February of this year. So it is nonstop backwards for the Ukraine side. Occasionally, they send reinforcements into one area, like just in front of Pokrovsk, one of the probably the number one target in the east. They have slowed down the initial or the direct front in there, but then that means Russia has gone elsewhere around the flanks. So they stop one place, but then they pull troops away to make it firm, and they hold the line a little while. But then when they pull troops from here, then Russia goes there with other troops, and then they penetrate there. So it's just a lose-lose for the Ukraine side right now.
Well, ignoring whether or not they have sufficient arms to defend themselves, does that suggest that there are insufficient troops to get the job done on the Ukraine side?
That's the primary issue right now. It's primarily a troop issue. Actually, a lot of the $61 billion that we approved earlier this year, a lot of stuff is also coming from several European states. They're actually getting more and more ammunition right now, but it's a manpower issue. It's always been, war is always won by men, not machines, not money. But they are having an incredibly difficult time because they're just running out of men, quite frankly. and they've been press ganging them into service. They literally take them off the streets. They're trying now recruiting drives, which are kind of curious because they feature lots of sexual intoned ads. I don't know why they think that's going to get somebody to go to the front, but that's what they're trying. They're pulling out all the stops. They just don't have enough to offset losses.
Well, maybe they should promise them the number of virgins after death when they die as an incentive to. Anyway, don't go down that road. Just let me. How about the idea of North Korean troops helping out the Soviet or the Soviets? There, I slipped again. North Korean troops helping out the Russians. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, you did. There's been more and more credible reports that North Korea has not simply been helping Russia with artillery shells, other kinds of military help, which has been enormous. I mean, like reportedly between 3 and 4 million shells have been sent by North Korea, but now also thousands of men, especially some of the defensive positions. The rumor is that some of the North Korean troops are going into places to replace Russian troops that are like defending borders, et cetera, to free up more combat troops to go into Ukraine. So far, there has been one report of North Korean troops that were killed in action. So there has been some fighting in the front, but we don't know quite the numbers. Apparently, it's in the low thousands at the moment. But a lot of that may be just be to kind of test the international waters to see what the pushback may be. And if there's not a lot, more could come later.
Well, this does not sound like it is aligning up to be very good, at least as far as the Ukrainians' bargaining position, to the extent some sort of treaty or settlement is negotiated. They're going to have to probably give up a sizable chunk of land in order to get to get some peace in the region.
Well, Zelensky continues to make all. I mean, he just went on another European tour this past few days where he keeps talking like he did when he was in Washington for the United Nations summit, that he wants to have a strong, peaceful settlement, that he can, quote, only get peace through strength, which he said just 2 days ago, that he wants to force Russia into peace. But there is no forcing Russia into peace when he's losing territory by the day. So the longer he waits to make that kind of offer to where he's willing to make a negotiated settlement and lose some territory, they're just going to keep losing more territory that's going to be taken by force of arms, not by negotiation. And every day his position gets weaker, not stronger. So I worry about the fate of Ukraine if they don't make a deal pretty soon.
All right, let's pivot over to Israel and the ongoing conflicts, multi-front battles being waged there. What's your assessment on going forward and where those conflicts are going to lead Israel?
Well, the biggest thing right now is that a lot of people have been surprised, me being one of them, that Israel has not already responded to the October 1st Iranian strike of 180 missiles. A lot of people thought that it would be a response within, I don't know, like 3 or 4 days maybe, or a week. But now then it's 2 weeks since that had happened. And I think that the reason is because there's a tremendous amount of diplomacy going on behind the scenes, where the U.S. is trying to talk Israel down from some of their bigger strikes, because you had Naftali Bennett in the first few days saying, man, we need to go after their nuclear weapons. We need to go after their oil infrastructure. And a lot in the United States were saying that. But that's how you get into a region-wide war. And I think no matter what the administration wants to happen on the ground, they also don't want it to go into an all-out war whose end is unknown, that could cost us a great deal. So I think that's starting to have some success. There was reports that the Israelis said overnight that they won't hit the energy or the oil infrastructure, and so they're going to go after military targets. The problem is, I'm not sure that that's going to be viewed as, appropriate for the Iranian side, and they may still respond back. So we may not be out of the woods yet. This thing could still escalate into a war.
Yeah, I was surprised the Israelis actually said that out loud. I mean, a Wall Street Journal article from this morning. Israel assures U.S. it will not strike Iran's oil and nuclear facilities, officials say. I don't know why you would say that out loud, even if you were not planning on hitting those. As long as the threat exists, maybe you keep Iran at bay a little bit.
Well, I mean, that assumes that that's a true statement and it's not a deceptive plan, which it could be. Like, make them think, okay, good, they're not going to come here. Oh, shoot, they did. So I don't take that at face value at all.
All right. Well, you're now general of the army, and you're a 5-star general, and you're in charge of making the decisions on behalf of the Israelis. What would you do by way of whether retaliate or not? What would be your path forward, considering, of course, as we have talked about and you just alluded to, that a serious escalation, like hitting their oil manufacturing or hitting their nuke sites, may very well result in potentially a global conflict, considering all the players that are involved on the Iranian side of the equation.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. What I would do is I would do some version of what they did after the April attack when Iran sent all those missiles and drones into Israel in response to Israel blowing up the embassy in Syria by striking something that doesn't cause casualties, like what the Iranians did. They made sure that both of their responses didn't kill anybody on the ground. They took out a few targets, and they just basically just said, hey, we don't want this to escalate, so we're going to hit non-sensitive targets. If you do something like that, then there's a chance that you can now tamp this down and stop going up the escalation ladder. Then I would focus on not expanding the war, because they've already committed themselves to this new incursion into southern Lebanon, which is a full-out war by itself. Don't let anybody tell you any differently. Every aspect of warfare is being engaged here, and that is already going to be a monumentally difficult task for Israel. They should not take on more than their military can handle. So I would, if I was a five-star general, I would say, let's figure out what to do about this one in Lebanon before we even think about doing anything with Iran.
And then, of course, I presume that strategy that you would propose is coupled with maybe cracking down and reimposing the sanctions on Iran to cut off their money supply, which the Biden administration hasn't been doing of late.
Well, I see that in the news a lot, and I scratch my head and I'm wondering what they're talking about, because there are incredible sanctions still in place on Iran. They were crippling sanctions, but the biggest place where they get money is areas we don't have the power to sanction, i.e., money going to China, because China and India, because they're buying Iranian oil not subject to our sanctions. So there's really not much more room to knuckle down there, and none of the sanctions have had any impact so far. So that's not really going to solve any problems, and most of the things that might are beyond our reach.
So what we then would have is two foreign powers, Iran and Israel, just continuing this tit for tat game over time with no
Well, here's the thing, though. Iran does not want a war. They have signaled in every way possible that they want to defend their interest as they see it, but they don't want it to escalate. So they're fine, especially after seeing Hassan Nasrallah assassinated in Beirut, and a lot of their senior generals. Some of the senior IRGC leaders have also been killed. Iran is fine with not escalating this, and I think they would like nothing more than for this tit-to-tat escalation ladder process to stop. So there is a reason to think that could happen.
I suppose one of the ways they could get it to stop is quit funding the terrorist organizations.
Well, and again, that depends on your perspective. From our perspective, it's a terrorist organization, but from their side, it's a resistance to all the things that Israel is doing against it and its interest in the region. And that's an unsolvable deal, because one guy's freedom fighters, another guy's terrorists.
Lots of layers in this cake, sir. It's always a pleasure to talk through them with you. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, another fun edition of the Deep Dive with Daniel Davis. Search for it online. You can find his podcast throughout the week, and I'll look forward to another discussion with you next week, my friend.
See you next week.
Take care, brother.